On today's Newsmakers, a man escapes the occult, Jesus appears in dreams, and Israel continues its battle against Hamas. That and more coming up. Welcome to Newsmakers, a show where we go behind the headlines each week to bring you interviews with pastors, entertainers, politicians, and other notable figures. On today's show, we are starting with a very important story. We're sitting down with Tal Henrik. She's a spokesperson for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. She's going to take us through what Israel is currently doing in Gaza and how that battle continues to unfold against Hamas. Let's welcome Tal to Newsmakers.
Let's start with October 7th. What was it like for you when you started to learn the details of what had happened?
It was awful. I was in New York. I live in New York. It was a Friday night for us. In Israel, it was a Saturday morning. But I was at home. I just came back from Friday night shishi dinner, as we say. And we started learning about the rockets. And it seemed, suspicious from the very beginning, the magnitude of the rocket fire. And then we started learning about the atrocities. We were, glued to the news TV screen in Hebrew. And physically, I can describe to you that it was hard to breathe. I felt as if I was trying to take in air and the oxygen was not absorbing in my body. That's how I described it to my fiance. And I got the call from the Prime Minister's office, and I was told to take the first available flight from New York, which I did the day after with the national airline that doesn't fly on Shabbat. And I think up until that moment when I got on that flight, it was hard to breathe. You couldn't breathe. And when the flight took off and when it landed, was gradually I started feeling as if more and more air was coming into my lungs. And finally, when I landed in Israel, and I know that I'm describing to you on the very, very personal level, but
that's what I want to hear, though. I want to hear that.
So suddenly the air filled me in. I felt like, that's it. Now you're here. Now you're doing something. Now you're part of the national effort against pure evil. And the moment I saw people in the streets, I saw, I went right into the central command from which the National Public Diplomacy Directorate, we have our center, we do all the interviews from there. And we were mobilized, and everyone in the country, civilians, soldiers, war cabinet, everyone was mobilized and is still mobilized, 4.5 months later, one way or another, which is really, really remarkable. You don't see left and right and center right now in Israel. Everyone is united in this. We know that you are united with us here. We know that if we are running for to take shelter when there's rocket fire, spiritually, you're running with us. It gives us strength.
Help people understand this, because obviously one of the critiques is 29,400, whatever the number currently that's being given, by the health organizations, on the Palestinian side. That's the number of people who have died in this, allegedly. So people will say, well, Israel is basically committing a genocide. You're hearing that narrative now. And yet what you just mentioned is something that often is overlooked, that the charter of Hamas is to wipe Israel off the map, to not have Israel be present anymore. Help people understand what is actually going on from your perspective and clear up sort of that first argument on the genocide.
So Israel has faced and is still facing an existential genocidal threat. As you said, Hamas, they chant it, they say it, they act on it. What more proof do we need to believe them? We don't need any more proof. After October 7th, we say no more. We're no longer agreeing to life next to a terror enclave ruled by a terrorist organization that wants us all dead. And their sick ideology upon which they educate Palestinian children, to dream to kill Jews, obliterate the Jewish state, to glorify martyrs. That's what Israel's dealing with. And we say no more. You know, we're a very much united society right now around this understanding of why we must dismantle, destroy this terrorist organization. There's no question about bringing our stolen people back home. They must come back home, all of them. And what we're doing now is to guarantee that Gaza will never, ever pose a terror threat to us again, because the year is 2024. Terrorism is unacceptable. And they have to understand that every time they choose terrorism, it will be a dead end for them. And this is the message that Israel is sending, but this is the message that everyone in the civilized world should want Israel to stand, not only on our behalf, but it's for all of us. Otherwise, if we don't send out this clear message, it's an open invitation, you know, to terrorists around the world to sow more chaos, more bloodshed, more violence in other places. Not just in our region, not just in our.
That's the balance. You're striking. What you're talking about there is the balance of, if you allow a terrorist organization to have victory in some way, what message does that send? It sends, oh, that works, right? What you're doing will work then, and they will do it other places. We've seen this before. We saw it on 9/11. We've seen it again and again. What is success for Israel? You know, you sort of mentioned making sure that you're not next to a terror organization anymore, obviously existing there. What does that look like in the end?
Success in the end means that all of our stolen people will come back home to their families. Success would mean that the terrorists in Gaza will no longer have an organized war machine, that they will not have powers like they've had up until October 7th. They will lack the desire to ever hurt us again and the military capabilities to do so. That's what we want to achieve. We want to achieve a different reality in Gaza in which more pragmatic voices understand that terrorism is a dead end and a must way forward, must be pursued. So that's what we're after. It's not about revenge. It's about accountability. Because if we're not going to seek accountability, you know, all the terrorists all over the world are taking notes right now. They're observing. They're going to do exactly the same, and not just in Israel, in the Middle East, but elsewhere. That's the point here.
And this is part of the informational battle we were talking about earlier, right? And it deeply matters. It opens up a lot of questions about how are we teaching young people, what are we allowing them to learn, and how do we need to do better in those areas. But I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us. We covered a lot of ground today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for doing this.
Stay tuned to CBN News and CBN News YouTube channel for continued coverage of the situation in Israel and Gaza. And up next, an artist escapes the occult and finds Jesus. This is Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. Welcome back to Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. Our next guest is Timothy Gagnon. Now, Timothy descended into the occult as a young man, but eventually found Jesus. Now he's an artist who is working to spread the gospel. Let's welcome him to Newsmakers to tell his story. Well, I want to thank you for coming on today. There's a lot in your story I want to unpack. We're going to talk about the Illuminated Messiah Bible, your beautiful artwork, and I want to get into your art in a second here, but I have to ask you, you spent a number of years as a young person, and when we look at the stats, it's young people today who are engaging in crystals and Ouija boards, and I mean, it is exploding among young people. You were there. You went through this. What kept you doing those things? Were you experiencing, when you were casting spells, when you were engaging with the occult, were you experiencing anything as a result of that? Any power as a result of that? Or was it more just activities that you enjoyed doing? I assume you saw or experienced something or you wouldn't have kept doing it.
You're right. And that's really the facts is the supernatural realm is obviously real. Most people say, oh, I believe in God. But then when you go into, well, do you believe in the devil? Well, they get all questioning. But I mean, the devil's just as real as God. He's an angel. God created angels. God created Satan. There is two sides to this spiritual war. And it's real. It's just as real as you and I talking over the internet right now. So yes, absolutely. When I would cast spells, when we would channel spirits, we would experience supernatural events and things that we couldn't explain. And especially with teenagers, you're very emotional when you're a teenager. And I think the devil uses that in a very, very powerful way. he gives you the heebie-jeebies just enough to get you thinking, whoa, what was that? And then you want to do more, and you do more, and you do more. And it's a slippery slope. And the next thing you know, you're doing things that you never thought you would be doing and believing things you would never thought you would be believing. And that's the lure of the occult. It's in a way, it's like a drug, you know, just give you enough to get you more and more and more.
Well, hours on the Ouija board. I mean, that's a common thing. You know, you start the Ouija board for 5 minutes and then you're doing 6 to 8 hours on it, as you were, and you're spending a work day's worth of time engaging with what you think are dead relatives when in reality, you're talking to the demonic realm. I mean, did you experience anything evil that freaked you out, or was it much more of what you were just sort of saying, that sort of light, scaring you just enough, but holding on to you?
Well, in the beginning, it was the ooh, scary, ooh, wow, that was fun, that was scary, that gave me the heebie-jeebies. But towards the end, oh no, it was very in-depth. We were very involved. It was, you know, we had 3 spirits that we were channeling most of the time and communicating with. And, you know, whether they were masquerading as something else or if they were really those demons, you know, that's debatable, but we were constantly communicating with 3 entities that claimed to be, you know, one claimed to be a demon, one claimed to be an angel, and one claimed to be a lost spirit in purgatory. Is what we had believed when we were going through and communicating with them on a constant thing. And you know, I mean that look, like I said, the occult's real. And there are spiritual powers on the other side. It's, you know, everybody wants to think God has all the power, and he does, but that doesn't mean that the occult doesn't have forces and things that they do.
So the thing about your story that's really kind of cool and unique, this is not just the Bible, it is also imagery weaved in, 66 different paintings that come together to form something pretty incredible. Talk a little bit about the impetus for this and what you're hoping to accomplish through it.
As an artist, this is my magnum opus. This is my Sistine Chapel. I'm exhausted. 5 years I have been working on this thing. And, you know, 5 years in the studio. You know, there's nobody there but me and God and a paintbrush. And, you know, that was really what this was. And so my favorite thing to study in the Bible, or my favorite Bible study, if you will, is messianic passages, the Old Testament prophecies about the Messiah, and then their fulfillment in the New Testament in Jesus Christ, Jesus of Nazareth. Those fascinate me. They get me really pumped up and excited. But because I'm an artist, I think and communicate visually. And so when I'm reading any book, I don't see words, I see images. And as an artist, any artist will tell you, I got to paint that. They have this thing where they go, oh, I got to paint that. I got to draw that. And so over time, these paintings started to develop through my Bible studies. And then I love the idea of incorporating the actual Word of God with art. And that's a very ancient form of art, a very ancient art form called an illumination. And all that word means is it's gold leaf, calligraphy, and narrative art, all combined into one. So an illuminated manuscript Bible, just like those old Bibles from the Middle Ages. Some of your listeners may be familiar with the Book of Kells, is the most famous one. But that art form actually goes all the way back to the Babylonian captivity in a Hebrew tradition called Hidur Mitzvah, which means the beautification of the Torah. In other words, making the Bible, the Word of God, beautiful. And it's a very ancient tradition in the Hebrew that the Christians during the Middle Ages adopted. And so this is a modern take on that. And so what I did was I made 66 messianic portraits, Jesus in every book of the Bible. And then from that study of the Messiah, it's kind of like, think of it like a painted devotional, you know, contemplating the Messiah and who he is and what that means. The coolest thing about it is that there's a little surprise hook, is that all of the 66 paintings, even though they're individual paintings, they combine together and they form a 12.5-foot cross, which in the art world you call a polyptych image. And so think of, you know, there's a famous polyptych of Marilyn Monroe where you see all the pictures of her in different colors. That's a polyptych. Multiple images combining into one big piece of art. The 66 messianic paintings combined together form a 12-foot cross that reveals a surprise image of Jesus on the cross. And so Moses parting the Red Sea in Deuteronomy are his toes. The Queen of Sheba is his knee. Jonah and the great fish are his right forearm, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I love that. And what a simple and amazing message. People are looking for truth and power, and we find that ultimately in Jesus. Appreciate your time today, Tim.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. I can talk all day about my Jesus.
You can get the Illuminated Messiah Bible wherever books are sold. We'll be right back on the other side of the break with a look inside claims that Jesus is appearing to Muslims in their dreams. This is Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. Welcome back to Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. For our final segment, we are sitting down with Lana Silk, U.S. Director of Transform Iran. Now, she claims that there are reports of Middle Easterners encountering Jesus in their dreams. She also says these reports are quite common and that God actually uses those interactions to draw people closer to him. Let's talk all about that now by welcoming Lana to Newsmakers. So let's start with a question here about the Middle East and these dreams. We've heard so many reports of people in the Middle East who are not believers, they're not Christians, and yet they have these dreams of Jesus and they have these profound interactions. How common are these dreams in the Middle East?
I'm very excited to tell you, Billy, that they really are quite common. God is using them to speak to Iranians all the time. He uses every method he can, but the Iranians are open to dreams. They are dreamers. They enjoy talking about their dreams, and they're aware of their dreams, and God uses that to speak to them.
Yeah, it's so interesting because in America, in the West in general, this idea of Jesus appearing in a dream is probably very foreign, not to everybody, but to most people. You know, this isn't something that people will report having happened to them. And obviously the dynamics are quite different in many areas of the Middle East when you compare that to America. Can you speak a little bit about why you think the West is so adverse or maybe just inexperienced with this sort of apparition?
Well, I think we have become quite secular in the West, and we have wanted to rationalize and understand everything. And when you're in a place where it has to be within your frame of reference and something that you can explain away, then you end up taking away some of the exciting, creative ways in which God likes to speak. So there is a challenge to us here in the West to take off our need to be able to completely own the information and the process and fully grasp it and just allow God to wow us and do mysterious things.
Well, that's absolutely true. And you also think, and I'd love for you to speak to this a little bit through your work at Transform Iran and what you're doing. When you look at the dynamics in a country like America, obviously, we have our squabbles about free speech. We've had Supreme Court cases of late that have been a big deal. But the reality is we have a First Amendment. We have religious freedom. There's religious liberty. People can go to church on Sundays. They don't have to be underground or fearful. And yet, in certain areas of the Middle East, in Iran in particular, those are not things that people enjoy. That freedom is not there. And so there's less of an opportunity, you would imagine, to be hearing the gospel, especially out in the open at a church. How do you think that factors into God's decision maybe to show up in these unique ways through dreams?
Well, that's a really good question. And there's so many things we can say about it. I think there's something about the perceived value that is associated to something that is free. And sometimes when it's something that we can just pick up and put down at a whim and have access to all sorts of versions of it. I mean, I'm thinking even right down to the basics of our scriptures. You know, I have multiple translations of the Bible sitting on my bookcase. I can go and buy more if I want. I can read them when I want and discard them when I want. That's different to the context in which it costs me everything, potentially even my life, to access something like that. And then I would hold on to it as the precious thing that it is and value it and prize it and use it. So we have a challenge here in the West in making sure that the things that are so freely available to us don't lose their actual value. And then I think tied into that, God then honors the cost that people pay in order to access the things of the kingdom of heaven. And when he sees that we're willing to I think about the parable, the man who found the field that had the pearl in it, and he was prepared to sell everything just to get that field because he knew that pearl of great price was there. So are we prepared? Have we found this thing of great value? And are we prepared to sell everything, lose everything, pay the highest cost possible to access it? When God sees that, he honors that and he speaks to us.
Yeah, and you think about the situation there and help people understand. I mean, I've covered this a lot. I've talked about this a lot. You certainly know at Transform Iran what is going on there. But what is it like for Christians in that country? What is it like to be a believer there?
It's dangerous. It's a day-to-day risk. People will look at a country like Iran and they'll say, that they are immediately put into a situation where they have to pay that great price, whether they like it or not. Yes, that's true in many ways. The Iranians could also keep quiet. They could find Jesus and they could keep that to themselves. But Jesus talks about the light on the hill, don't hide it. Put it right up on the top of the hill and let everyone see it. And when Iranians live like that, then it is very costly to them. The government is tracking. It is illegal for them to convert to Christianity. It's illegal for them to own a Bible, let alone share it with others and talk about it. And the price they pay is a whole range. It can be a business shutdown. It can be prison. It could be torture. It could be family members threatened and harassed. So they know when they go for Jesus in the way that they do, that it could cost them everything.
Well, I so appreciate you joining us today. We went through the dreams. We talked about ways that we can be praying, and I'm looking forward to hopefully connecting again very soon.
Thank you, Billy. I appreciate you.
You can find out more about Transform Iran at transformiran.com. And we'll be right back in just a moment with more Newsmakers. That's all for Newsmakers. Thank you for watching, and be sure to head over to the CBN News YouTube channel. That's where you will find the full interviews that you saw on today's episode. Plus, you can check out our new daily Newsmakers podcast. That's right, it is daily. Every day of the week, Monday through Friday, we have one featured interview, one full interview. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to hear that. And as far as this show on TV here, we'll see you back next week.